think the mic works. We'll give her a few seconds to adjust some settings.
Can you do me a favor and ask somebody to take some pictures?
Will somebody take some pictures?
Somebody take some pictures that we can have of this, because I know it would be good for us to have.
Oh, yeah.
And then our work in D.C., I'd love to just let people know that I was in Nebraska. That I wasn't just gallivanting around the country.
Your colleagues don't believe you? Is that?
Well, you know.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm Kevin Singer. So happy to be here in Nebraska at Concordia University, which has just been such a wonderful place. I just got coffee from 10:29, 31. Was I within 3? Okay. I mean, you know, yeah, it's the decaf. It's just been so nice. Everyone here is so wonderful and so kind. And the campus is really pretty. And I went downtown Seward very briefly. And I have to say, I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina. Or if you're Russ, you say Rolla. Not real sure why, but he's somewhere. And that's the capital of North Carolina. And your state house is nicer. I mean, your courthouse down there is nicer than our state house. I'm so confused. But anyway, so Neighborly Faith, what do we do? Why are we here? We are interested in equipping Christians especially to know how to be good neighbors to people of other faiths who are not of the Christian faith. And that does not include being any less Christian. We think you can be passionately Christ-centered, gospel-centered in your life, missional, Bible-based, Bible-focused, and be a terrific neighbor. And part of how we do that is we have dialogue, we have conversations about issues and topics and themes that are of concern both to Christians, but also to people of other faiths. And this particular dialogue will be about religious freedom, which is a topic that seems to only be growing in importance and continues to be an urgent focus for those of us who are worshipers here in this country. So with that being said, I am going to allow our speakers tonight to introduce themselves. And we're going to start with Dr. Gregory Seltz.
Well, first of all, it's great to be here with you. Thank you for the invitation. It's been a pleasure to get to know you as well. And as I think about my work, I've been an evangelist. I've been an urban church planting pastor all my life. So that's what I want you to see about my dialogue. I'm not really an education person, not a professor per se. I was a person who served in New York City, served in South Central LA, multiple cultures, multiple languages. I've seen the power of the gospel work. We had Bible studies on Wall Street, with multi-denominations and all those different kind of things. And now I'm in Washington, D.C. for one reason, because there is a secular government that we're dealing with on the Hill that is saying the Christian church, and literally all churches, any faith-based churches, any people who believe in God, they're a real problem. If we're going to have a utopian culture, they're a real problem, and we've got to actually deal with them. And our answer to that is no. We have First Amendment protections. We're willing to live as good neighbors with each other, willing to have dialogues across the fence. But the First Amendment protects our ability to have those dialogues without fear of government coercion or contradiction to the contrary. So all I do in Washington is take politics out of it so that we can have dialogues about faith, about salvation, but those are dialogues between two people. They're definitely not dialogues that the government is supposed to be coercing into our lives. So that's what I do now, but I just want you to know I love our church. I've been at this 35 years now, and I'm just happy to be part of this dialogue with you.
He also has the best radio voice in the universe. I kind of want you to narrate my whole life. Is that a thing?
Anyway, I am back on the first. Let me just say this real quick.
Little
I'm back on
clip.
radio, and so if you guys wanted, our resources are online for you. Please make sure I give that before I go, because I always forget to do that.
Yep. And I will definitely remember. All right. Ismail, go ahead.
Yeah, so my name is Ismail Royer. I am originally from St. Louis, Missouri. Missouri. I was raised a Catholic, and in around 1988 or so, decided that I was too smart to be religious. I was really clever guy, and I got involved in progressive, sort of very far left politics. And as part of that ideology, it's that religion is the opium of the masses. It's just a tool to keep people down and so on. I lived in that sort of delusion for a few years, maybe about 3 or 4 years. But by the time I turned about 18, I realized that that was false, and that I actually was not an atheist. It's not that I made a decision to believe this or that, but I just knew that I believed in God. And so at that point, I began searching, and I eventually converted to Islam in 1992 at the age of 19. I went off to D.C. to go to college, and I eventually started working with an Islamic civil rights organization, mainly dealing with workplace discrimination, and also going to college at the same time. Unfortunately, I ended up getting involved in sort of militant movements, and really, as I look back and reflect, it was kind of an extension of my time prior to that, when I was involved in these kind of very far left militant type ideologies. I really, unfortunately, did not leave that behind. And so I kind of transferred that over to my new life, and instead of really focusing on Islam as a way of just my relationship with God and the Creator and those around me, I got involved in these sort of militant activities. Eventually, I ended up getting involved with a group in Kashmir, which is a strip of land between Pakistan and India, with a rebel group there and some sort of conflict. I really thought I was doing the right thing. I was trying to help people and so on, and just sort of deluded. So I actually ended up being charged in federal court with violating United States neutrality laws, and went to prison for 13 and a half years. And I came out in the end of 2016 and began working in I did a lot of thinking, and it's very difficult, in fact impossible, to encapsulate that in just a brief discussion. But, I have been working since then with a nonprofit group called the Religious Freedom Institute in Washington, D.C., which is a multi-confessional group founded by Catholics, but our current president is evangelical. And I'm in charge of the Islam section, and my job is to make arguments for religious freedom and peaceful pluralism. And that word pluralism is a little bit scary because it can mean secularism and universalism. That's not what we mean by that. We mean people of faith living together, working together for the common good, and practicing their faith in their lives. So that's what I make those arguments from Islamic religious tradition. And so that's what we're here to talk about tonight, is what do our faith resources say about, theological resources say about the need to support that for everyone.
All right, so we're going to start with a lightning round. So that doesn't mean talk as fast as you can. That means talk within a certain time frame. And these two guys can talk, trust me. Secretly, every question will be a lightning round. I just haven't told you that yet. So this is the first question. Why is it important that you are here with this person, so Christian, Muslim, having this conversation? What makes you want to be here doing this with this person? Why is it important?
Yes. Well, I mean, I guess I'm getting to the point where I'm a little tired of hearing that Christianity is exclusive. The Christian worldview is that we're all 100% sinners, and that God actually acts to save us on His own terms. We're not going to talk about the saving message differences. So if you come for that kind of discussion tonight, but we're going to talk about how we have a lot of things in common that allow for us to have a civil society, a society where we can honor one another and be good neighbors to one another, so we can have those bigger conversations. And so we're trying to demonstrate how our tradition, our Christian tradition, actually created the very tolerance that you have in this country. The notion of keeping the state out of these discussions so that free people could be good neighbors to each other is a Christian principle, a New Testament principle. So honestly, being here today is to try to show and demonstrate how our faith opens up these dialogues, as I'm sure you'll want to say the same thing. So that's the reason I came.
Yeah, and I would say likewise that the United States and its principle of religious liberty really does come from Christian principles. And those are principles that we also share in Islam and, in fact, in Judaism as well. So this is something that, like, this country is a haven for people from all over the world. Everyone wants to come here so that they can live here and be able to practice their religion in the way that they want to. My ancestor, the first person in the Royer family in my direct lineage, was Lutheran, and he came from the Holy Roman Empire. He had fled France. His family had fled France when the king made it illegal in the late 1600s to be a Lutheran. And they went from the Holy Roman Empire to England, and then from England to Pennsylvania, and arrived in Pennsylvania in 1734. And the first thing that they did was build a church, a Lutheran church, which I just took my children to go visit, which still existed in Pennsylvania. They came here for the ability to build that church and to practice and to worship. And so, I went, about 20 years ago, I attended a lecture from the imam, or the prayer leader in Mecca. And he had come to the United States to visit. And he gave a lecture and he said, you all can practice Islam better than, in many ways, better than we can in Saudi Arabia. Because in Saudi Arabia they had very strict rules about who can lead the prayer and who can teach religion, and it all has to be approved by the government. The government actually issues the sermons that people are allowed, that the imams read, and it has to approve it and so on. So that's not the case here. So we really appreciate and love that, and we want to, in my view, it is in the interest, first of all, it is in the interest of Muslims that the Christian virtues survive and revive in America. And second of all, it's not just in our interest, because it's a human good that people be able to worship and believe and live their faith in public. And because we want good for everyone, we should want that for them.
Is there a particular scriptural text that for you really grounds your passion for this work? Because I feel like sometimes with religious freedom, maybe some of you feel this way too, it can become a bit technical, a bit legal. And of course, we are here as people of faith who, as we're saying, we're deriving this idea of religious freedom from faith. And of course, the source of faith, or the testimony of faith is in the scripture. We'll start with you, Greg. Is there a text or a verse or a book or something that...
And this is what's, like I said it in the sermon at chapel today. I said, when the founding fathers said that Martin Luther was the founder of the Bill of Rights, you Lutherans ought to be able to explain why that's true. Because that's what James Madison said about Martin Luther. Here's the text. And this is a unique doctrine. It's called Two Kingdoms. And Jesus says, when they try to trap him when he's actually about the tax issue, who should we pay taxes to? He says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. And the point he's making there is God's at work in both Caesar and in the church. But God works differently through Caesar. He works to preserve the world. So our teaching biblically is to differentiate God's preserving work and his saving work, because that's how Jesus does it. And then later on you have these passages in 1 Peter where it says, honor Caesar. Now folks, I don't know about you, but Caesar was hanging Christians up and lighting them on fire at the time. And so for Peter to say, honor Caesar, not believe in Caesar, not put your trust in Caesar, he doesn't give you any salvation, but even God, through a non-believer like Caesar, could keep the peace and keep the civility, and so you could honor him in the way that he was was the ruler so that this peace of Rome, which actually protected Christians a lot of times too, could be done. So learn how to differentiate like Jesus teaches you, and learn how to do God's preserving work when you're doing politics, so that you can share the gospel in your individual relationships with people. And that is a biblical understanding of how to engage the public for the sake of the culture and the church.
Thank you. I would cite two verses. One is the Quran says, I'll read it in Arabic and I'll say it in English. لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي. Means there is no compulsion in religion. Truth stands out clear from error. So what does that mean? It means that faith cannot be coerced. Like, you know, it's the same way that when I realized that I wasn't an atheist anymore, I had no choice. It's not only that you cannot force me to believe something, I can't even force myself to believe something. You know, it's your consciousness dictates you to what you believe and then to follow that belief in your daily life. And so there can be no. It's not just don't coerce people. It is that there is no coercion in faith. And why? Because truth stands up clear from error. You will recognize the truth when you see it, and you'll recognize error when you see it. And yeah, we have different beliefs. What I can say about you, and what you can likewise say about me, is that the devil has confused us about what is truth and what is error. Right? Like, we're friends, and we can agree that one of us is wrong. We can't both be right. But at the same time, we're right. We agree in about, you know, I don't know what, I can't give a percentage, but we agree in a great deal, and we disagree on a great deal. So that which we agree on, God has guided us both to that truth. And that which we disagree on, one of us has been deluded. You know, one of us is deluded. And yet, there is nothing that any external power, or even internally, we can do to force ourselves to believe Him. Now, the other thing I was going to, the other verse I was going to mention is that in Quran, God says in Quran, and we have given Adam, or the children of Adam, nobility, dignity. And those who, God is saying this, and those who give, those who are scholars of the Quran classically, they said that what this means, this dignity, consists in the fact that God imbued or created Adam and his children with dignity both in his soul and in his visage and his face and his creation. And so there's something noble about the child of Adam, which requires that he be treated, or she be treated with dignity that is due to that person. So to respect the right of others to follow their own belief is part of that dignity, respecting the dignity that is due to the human being.
So this question is particularly for you, but we're going to get into it more. So Dr. Seltz, you know that there are different perspectives on this in the church, especially among American evangelicals, about should we as Christians really be defending, strengthening, promoting religious freedom for groups that we would say promote falsehood in their teachings. I mean, this is, John MacArthur obviously is a very popular opponent of sort of this religious freedom for all perspective. Right. And I know for even me myself, I've struggled with this idea. And so how would you respond to those who would say, we as Christians, we have an interest in our own religious liberty, but maybe we shouldn't really be in the business of ensuring that, Muslims grow by fourfold by 2050 or something. I mean,
we don't have that as our goal, because as we talked about, I would prefer that you came to know me as your Savior, and you would prefer that I would become Muslim too. And so neither one of us is giving up that wish at all, okay? But here's what I would say. First of all, when you hear him talking about what he's talking about, if you differentiate God's preserving work from his saving work, virtually we agree with almost everything he's talking about, because he believes your father and your mother. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not murder. Not thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. These are all thou shalt nots that we share with him. We share with other cultures. We share with other religions. But that doesn't save us. It preserves us. It's not that the law is bad. You learn this as Lutherans, law and gospel, right? The law of God is God's word. The problem's in our hearts. And so, while I heard John, so that's first of all, one of the reasons why we can agree on a lot of these religious liberty issues is they're not part of the saving message of the Christian faith. They're part of the preserving message of the Bible. Okay? And God preserves through Caesar, for goodness sake. Caesar was not a faithful Christian. And so there's got to be a struggle of what do we mean by Caesar. So most of our discussions tonight are going to be, what do we want the state to do properly so we can all have this discussion. What you're saying is some Christians think that's ridiculous too. And John MacArthur would say, well, why don't, if he believes that he's an error, why would I want to give him the platform to do that? And my answer to that is, if you abide in Christ's word, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. This is the power of God for salvation. The point is that we finally, in dialogue with each other, we do believe the word of God actually will accomplish what it's called to do. So we're not afraid of being in dialogue with people of all faiths because we want them to get to know who Jesus is. It's his word that does that. So that's why I respectfully disagree with MacArthur, because there's at that final point where you're proclaiming a word that saves you just as much as it saves anybody else, and it's that word that as long as I can protect it, to share that word in the public square, I'm okay with letting the chips fall with it.
So Ismail, obviously, there are differing, I don't want to overgeneralize, but there are cultural, legal aspects to the environment in the Middle East where there may or may not be interest in maximizing religious freedom for Christians, maybe Jews. You know, what about, opponents in Islam who might say you sold out? You sold out, sure. I would say.
Yeah, well,
we're nice guys.
Yeah.
That's a great point. These are nice people. That's the whole point of this.
Go
ahead, Sarah, but yeah.
So it's a very interesting question because you're not going to, first of all, you're not going to see a lot of enthusiasm in the Muslim world for, say, someone coming in proclaiming the truth of Christianity. But at the same time, we have in our faith resources, theological resources in history and a history of preserving the religious practices of Christians and Jews. Now, historically, some of you may be familiar with this, it was kind of sort of what's called dhimmi arrangement, where Muslims are the dominant religion, and then Christians and Jews were allowed to have a certain amount of autonomy that was allowed to go so far but no further. So you're allowed to build, in some parts of the Muslim world it was, in certain periods of history it was, you are allowed to have a church, but you're not allowed to ring the bells, or you're allowed to have a church, but the steeple cannot go higher than the Muslims or whatever,
Give us back Hagia Sophia.
Well, yes, but actually, Hagia Sophia is a very interesting example. No, it's a really interesting example because it was closed by a secularist. Muslim So the question is, do you want it to be a museum, or at least God is being worshipped in it? I'm not defending what Erdogan did in that situation, but to unwind the problems with, for example, Hagia Sophia, it's going to take a lot. So we have the situation in the Middle East and the question of how to preserve religious freedom in the Middle East. And I mentioned that even Muslims are not actually enjoying religious freedom because the governments there have this tight stranglehold on religion, which is not how it's supposed to be.
Our friends
from Iran is a great example where you have a government that has associated itself so closely with religion and has made itself deeply unpopular with its despotic, tyrannical tendencies. And just like James Madison said in the Remonstrance, very famous document, he said that when religion associates itself with government, when the government falls in popularity, by human nature, the human beings begin to dislike the religion as well. And so that's why it preserves religion to have religious institutions separated from worldly authorities, which is not to say that you have immoral policy. The policy has.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and then we can reflect on that. Now, there's a verse in the Quran that says, if God had not checked one group of people against another group of people, then the synagogues and the churches and the mosques would all be destroyed. What that means, and those who interpret the Quran, and we have to go to what the classical scholars, how they interpret it, they said that this means that it is one of the meanings of this, it is the responsibility of the believers, it is the responsibility of the Muslims to protect the houses of worship of Christians and Jews, which unfortunately is not the behavior that you see all the time with Muslims, but at the same time there is historically this preservation and allowance. You mentioned the Hagia Sophia, but this was a case of conquering, and I mean, I can't defend that, and I can't defend that, but it's not the norm of it's not the ideal that we're supposed to be living up to. The ideal that we're supposed to be living up to is to protect the houses of worship of those, even those who are not Muslims. So one of the, there was a debate about this very issue, and they said, well, why should we, in this classical period, why should we support or why should we allow churches to continue in Muslim lands when falsehood is being taught in them? And they said because God is at least being mentioned, even though there are some doctrinal errors from our point of view there, God is being mentioned in those churches, and so we have to allow. What I would take that into the American context and say, so my organization and I personally filed a friend of the court brief in the Supreme Court to support a case in which there was a cross in Bladensburg, Maryland, massive concrete monument that was built for to honor the dead in World War I. And an atheist organization called the American Humanist Organization wanted to tear it down. And they said that this is a violation of the Establishment Clause, right, this separation of church and state, because it's on public land. And I filed a brief supporting the cross. And we won in the Supreme Court. And I put out on my Twitter account of my organization, I said, victory, we've won with this, this cross. And someone predictably attacked me for that, a Muslim leader. And he said, that's not a good thing, for a cross to continue to stand, because the cross is a symbol of disbelief in his view and our faith. And I said, but no, because we don't want the annihilation of all symbols of religion in the public, because when you do that, what's actually left standing is irreligion. You're leaving standing. Secularism is itself a religion. So when you have torn down all the symbols of religion like they did in France and so on, then you're left with you're not left with neutrality. You're left with an actual ideology that is very militant against you, against me, and so on. So we support the retaining and reviving Christianity in the public square because it is a good thing. It is a good thing because it is closer to the truth than irreligion.
I got to give us, before we got to be clear on our definitions. That's one of the hard parts about doing these dialogues in a half hour or 45 minutes.
Yeah.
When we say religion, like Christianity, in our view, is not a religion. It's a proclamation of freedom. That God actually accomplished freedom by living, dying, rising, and for you. That's not something you did. It's something God did because that's what you needed. Because the idea, religion to us means you do stuff to get God off your back. That's what religion means to us. And there's lots of religions. And then there's this proclamation of what God did for all people. Well, my point is this. When we talk about religion using the term we're using, we're talking about the morals of humanity. We're talking about moral issues. And so we have a lot of similarity on moral issues. And we're fighting secularists who actually say there are no morals. There are no truths. We're fighting that on the Hill. But where we have common cause are these moral truths. Obviously, the idea of salvation, we don't think the law can save you. We think the law can sustain and preserve our world and keep our world relatively safe. And that's why God can even work through Caesar. Because if he does, even if his heart's not in it, he still might do the right thing and punish the bad guys. That's good enough for what we want Caesar to do, which is why our founders limited Caesar. Our founders actually took Caesar, and actually they made you Caesar. They made the citizen Caesar, and they bound the government, and that's what makes America unique, which allows everyone to come so I think that's all, we just got to make sure we're talking about clear things. We celebrate moral truths together with Jews on the hill, Muslims on the hill, in the sense that we're saying, you know, if you're amoral or immoral, this can't work. And so that's what we suffer. That's part of God's preserving voice on the hill for us, not his saving.
And if I could add to that, about sort of this consensus, our scholars talk about man's rights, or human beings' rights, and the rights of God. So the right of human beings to God is that we worship him, you know, and we worship him alone. And so in our faith, those who, you know, again, not to be offensive, I'm just speaking, that to consider Jesus to be divine detracts from the law, from the rights that we owe to God. However, that is not the domain of man to interfere with. And we believe, like there's a saying, that God is very lenient when it comes to the violation of his rights, because he allows that to persist on the earth, and will deal with all this on the day of judgment when we all stand before him. However, the rights of human being to human being, he is very strict over. And that this is why he destroyed the people of Noah. This is why he destroyed the people of Lot, because they were oppressive and wrongdoing to one another. So this is in our theology. Okay, so that this is also from the verse of the Quran. So in other words, that is to say that you and I, we can agree on the rights that human beings. I mean, almost like you mentioned the Ten Commandments, and we can also have like the Noahide laws that were revealed to Noah after the flood. And so there's a law in how human beings are to deal with one another. Like what was it, Roger? What was the guy in Rhode Island? Roger Williams.
Yeah.
He mentioned about the Ten Commandments, with one tablet being between God and man, another tablet being between man and man. You know, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, and so on. That's how man is supposed to deal with one another. So we can agree on that. And we can agree furthermore that is how God wants human beings to treat one another. Even if they violate the other tablet, he still wants us to treat one another that way.
That's what Jesus said on the cross.
But I would add to that, though. I would add to that our agreement is not only in those things. Yes, when it comes to doctrine, when it comes to saving, the doctrine of salvation, yes, we disagree on many things, but we also agree on many things. We agree that there's a day of judgment. We agree that God sent prophets. We agree that that God sees what we do, and that we have to fear him in our actions and
the law is actually written in human nature.
And that the law is in the human nature. So there is a great deal that we actually agree. For example, if I take an oath that's of office that says I pledge to God that I will fulfill these duties and stuff. If you know that I believe in God, even if you believe that I have very serious errors when it comes to salvation, if you know that I'm a God-fearing person, then you're going to feel more confident about my ability to discharge them. That's why even Muslims take oaths of in court and so on Quran, because a person who violates that is really just a hypocrite. Anyway.
Okay, so we're going to move into another lightning. It's so lightning, you only get like a sentence, okay? If it's more than a sentence, you've got to go. I'm sorry. All right, can we agree to those rules on this? Okay. So I'm going to ask you both, what do you consider to be the single greatest threat to religious liberty in our country right now? And if you want, you can focus just on your particular faith community. So for you, Greg, it could be Christians. For you, Ismail, it could be Muslims. Or maybe the answer will be the same. I honestly don't know what they're going to say. And then the second question will be, I can barely remember the first one already. The second one is, what do you think is the single issue that you think Christians and Muslims can most efficiently work on together? So let's start with the first one, which is, what do you consider to be the single greatest threat? You only get a sentence. You can do two sentences.
Look,
but
greatest threat is a misunderstanding of the role of government in your life. That's the single greatest threat, because the concept of a benevolent government is an oxymoron. And so the founders understood that the government had a limited role, and the threat to religious liberty now is the government's become all-inclusive, and it's secular, and it doesn't believe there's anything called truth, and yet it's going to impose all that on people of faith. Our First Amendment was built for a religious culture and a religious people, and I would say most people on the Hill today would love to get rid of the First Amendment.
Right.
What I would say is complementary to that, and I would say that it's a fading of religious virtue, and because we're in a Christian land, I would say it's a fading of Christian virtue. Because Christian virtue is what allows a proper understanding of the Constitution and of our order that the founders founded. And without that, we're all being thrown to the wolves, Christian, Muslim, Jew.
And I think the only reason why they're not really going after the Muslims and Jews yet is because we're the predominant wolves.
Right.
And I speak kindly on this because my hometown, Dearborn, Hamtramck, is a very Muslim area now in our culture, and Hamtramck is now completely run by Muslims, and I'm watching it because they are actually trying to do religious liberty for everybody who lives there, and now they're getting attacked. And so we'll see, because that's a good testimony of whether this really is what we're talking about or not, because this is a Muslim. Hamtramck is now, used to be Polish, and now it's Muslim, and they're trying to have religious liberty for everybody who lives there, and they're now the ones trying to execute that. So we'll see what happens, because they're being attacked by the secular progressive groups that we have around.
All right, so you've already started bleeding into the second question, which is great. It's sort of like, okay, Christians, Muslims, you talked about, similar morals, similar positions on Ten Commandments and other values. Pragmatically speaking, is there an issue? Is there a policy? Is there something practical that you think Christians and Muslims can realistically work on together when it comes to religious freedom?
He's already said it in the idea, the common idea that because we're created by God, this is in our Declaration of Independence. God created us, therefore you have inherent dignity. Therefore you have these inalienable rights that the government doesn't give you, it has to grant you. I got to tell a story because I think this will blow your minds. Okay, I'm in an immigration. I think I told you the story. I'm in an immigration meeting in Washington D.C. Democrats, Republicans, everybody's all up in arms, screaming at each other. Finally, this one staffer gets up and says, "Is there anything we can do to get us unified? Because this is tearing our country apart." I was on the panel, and I don't think we had an imam on the panel, but we had a rabbi on the panel. We had some other secular leaders and everything. The rabbi jumped up and said this before I got a chance. He said, if we could all start treating each other as made in the image of God, I think we could get past a lot of what we're doing. We've come up with good policies that honor the borders of our country, but also humane policies that hold, that allow for certain things. Anyway, I always ask people, how do you think the room responded to that? Remember, this is a political gathering. This is not a Christian gathering. Almost to a person, people said, "Oh, everyone's probably on their own religion or standing ovation," because it's a principle that allows us to lay a ground floor of civility in our culture. Everybody stood for that. Clap. But then I, of course, had to ruin the moment because I'm a Lutheran. I actually very proud of our message. Very, very, very beautiful. My point was this. So I said, here's the problem, guys. If he goes outside of this room and says it to the press or says it to anybody, they will. If you try to say it in a paper in your university, you get in half. That's the problem. So again, as he and I fight on the Hill, there are certain things that we fight for and say that's universal in the human existence. Confucius teaches this, some of these things, but they're not saving words for our point of view. They're preserving words. Well, my point is that the secularists don't think any of it's true, and they're trying to wipe it out. And so he and I are making common cause on some of these issues to say, no, we're going to push back and not let you secularize this discussion.
Well, and again, I have to agree with everything Greg said, and I would add, in terms of pragmatic issues, I would say parental rights is a very important issue. That's the right of parents, especially We've seen school officials attempting to supplant the role of parents. They want to force them to read certain books and to adopt certain values that violate the religious beliefs of the parents. And we have in the Constitution, the Supreme Court explained, and again, as you said, these rights are not granted by the government. They're merely declarative. You know, the government merely recognizes what is actually true, already true, and by virtue of our creation by God. The human being, by virtue of his or her creation, has the inherent right to raise their children as they wish, upon the faith that they wish. And that cannot be violated by the government, and that is what's happening. Another example is, in California, they just passed a bill that if a parent does not affirm the child's claim to be a different gender, that parent can lose custody of the child. This is a violation of the parent's rights. So this is a really important one. Another one I would mention is life issues, abortion is also another really potentially good, pornography. These are all really good opportunities for us to work
Can
together.
I just jump on that one real quick? Because sometimes in pro-life, we forget exactly what it is we're defending. Another great opportunity, I was in the middle of the protest after Dobbs, and we were being, slammed around a little bit. There was a guy named, for Democrats for Life, 20 million Democrats were pro-life. I don't know if you do that. But we finally looked at the crowd and said, why do you think we're here? Why do you think I'm taking this abuse from you guys in this crowd? And they said, oh, you're rubbing our noses in it, you don't really. I said, no. Here's what we're saying, exactly what you're saying. He said, life is something that you have inherently. It has inherent dignity. And we're saying that the government doesn't grant you that dignity, nor can it ever take it away. And I said, if you listen to your politicians who are arguing right now, they're saying that the government can classify a certain innocent human life as not worth living, and then can snuff it out if they feel like it. And I don't care if it's in the womb or when you get a little older, they start to say, that life's not worth living, or this Muslim life's not worth living, or this Christian life's not worth living.
But it's
one
one
person
person
do that.
Yeah.
And so we were saying, the government never has that right to determine the dignity of innocent human life. And interestingly enough, they said, oh, we used to believe that. We didn't think you could believe that. So that's what I'm telling you. And as he and I make common cause for just giving us freedom, we're going to have these kind of dialogues. We might not always agree, that's fine. But I don't want them dictating that.
And by the way, speaking of dogs, I do a lot of work in friend of the court briefs that are filed in
I wish I could do that more. I can't.
Well, that's one reason I want to get your card, because we got to work together on this.
Well, they won't let me to church. The LCMS has to. I can't do it.
I see.
I've signed on to all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And I get in trouble.
Well, what I was going to say was that, so I actually, my organization didn't file a brief, a amicus brief in Dobbs, although I wish we had, and I tried. I just couldn't find a lawyer who was, at such short notice, was able to work with us on it. However, I did, if you are familiar with Benjamin Carson, I did research for his brief. Yeah, I put together a section on natural law from Aquinas to Blackstone to Islamic sources on natural law with respect to abortion. So I can say that I contributed in some way to the order. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because Ben Carson, a lot of Muslims say, oh, they don't like him because he said some, frankly, Ben Carson, where he said, well, he didn't think that a Muslim should be in government. But here's the thing about someone like that. He is someone who takes his religion seriously. And he probably had not, at that point, met a Muslim and didn't realize that there were Muslims who would, actually support, natural law and religious freedom. So that's why this type of dialogue and working together is so important.
He's a good guy. He's a Detroit.
I'm sure. Okay.
Detroit guys always come.
What does that even mean?
Okay.
Come on.
This just came to my head, so it's obviously going to be great. If y'all could ask each other one question, this now from the Muslim perspective, Greg coming from the Christian Lutheran perspective, it could be anything. It could be about their experience in this country. It could be, what inspires them, something like the other one question, what would it be?
About our topic or about anything in general?
I mean, the topic is great, but
Well, I mean, honestly, the only thing I will say I'll struggle with a little bit with Islam and its worldview because of the Quran, what you're saying, but also the experience. Like I said before, I see that when Christians, even in the Old Testament, Israel is a theocracy. And in the New Testament, that theocracy is in essence torn apart because the whole goal, from our point of view, is that the promise was put in a people, the children of Abraham, not because the children of Abraham were so good, but it's that God was actually showing that he was going to bring a Messiah. And he literally says, test me on this. I'm going to put it in history, and it's going to come to fruition in the child born of Mary, who was actually a descendant of Abraham and a descendant of Adam, to fulfill the promise of safety. So when it comes to the New Testament, then, you see the theocracy kind of, that's where Jesus tears it apart and says, no, I'm still preserving the world, but I'm preserving the world through Caesar because the salvation has come to fruition. That's, to me, that undergirds the two authorities in the West, not always practiced properly, of the Holy Roman Emperor and the head of the church in the West was Pope. But those two authorities, as they fought over each other, that's what birthed individual liberty in the American experience. People even claim that. James Madison says, if you want religious liberty for an individual, you have to have a properly organized public church and a properly organized public state that has authority in the culture, because if you get rid of the church or you get rid of the state, you cease to exist as an American citizen. So my point would be, that flows naturally from Jesus' teaching in Matthew 22, give Caesar what Caesar, give God what God. Do you have in your tradition that differentiating between the state's work, which is God's work too,
Right.
but it's not God, or is it, and even some Christian traditions have the state and the church operating one way, and we say, no, the Bible says God operates two different ways, all gospel. You know what I'm talking about when I say the Lutheran Center. So that would be my only question, because that's what I don't see in the Muslim world.
So the contemporary Muslim world is not something to look at for any kind of example, because Islamic civilization is really at its lowest point that it's ever been right now. Unfortunately, the Muslim world is dominated by petty dictators, mostly, for the most part, of varying degrees of tyranny, and really would have been unrecognizable to earlier generations. Even 200 years ago, would not have recognized what they're seeing now. So what we really want to talk about is, it's difficult because we can talk about the ideal, and then we can talk about the reality, and then we can also talk about what is practical now to achieve religious liberty and human flourishing in the Muslim world. So those are actually kind of sort of three different questions. But what I would say to sort of address kind of all of that is there's an Islamic scholar of Islam from originally what is now Tunisia named Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun had his family had been part of the ruling class in Spain when Spain had been under the Muslim Empire, and then fled to North Africa. So he's writing in around 1470, something like that. And he is discussing the arrangement between religious scholars and government. And he said, some people think that religious scholars should be involved in running administrative affairs of the government. And he said that is not correct. They should not. Why? Because they don't know anything about running the government. They know about religious sciences, but they don't know what is necessary for managing human affairs. And then, it is part of human nature, and I'm paraphrasing, part of human nature that governance take place in human society. We have to have people to defend the weak against the poor. We have to have the common defense. We have to have common weights and measures, and so on and so on. So there's a necessity for by, by religious law. So likewise, I would say in America, but that's not a theocracy. A theocracy is where is government that is run by the church, or by the church, or the church. Yeah. So that's actually not what that's not the ideal. Like what you see in Iran, for example, is something sort of kind of nerdy, but the rise of Khalid, which is a philosophy of Khomeini, which is that the religious scholars should be in charge of government, is actually like not accepted, by people. And so so this sort of merging is actually quite dangerous. And I would say that it's very much for the reasons that Madison described. But at the same time, if you look at the United States, I'm a huge fan of a scholar named Eric Vogelin. If anyone wants to look him up, Eric Vogelin was a German or Austrian political scientist, fled from the Nazis. He was actually Lutheran. He died around 1985 or something. But one of my favorite political philosophers. So he said that America is the last bearer of the civilizational substance of Christendom. Why? Because it was founded on the truth, what he called the truth of the soul. That is, that God is created by man, that there is an order, a hierarchy, with God as the Lord of the universe, and the human being as the noble creation of God, and that our civilization, our United States, is really just an extension of England, and England being an extension of that Western civilization, and not only Western civilization, but the Mediterranean civilization in which Islam also participated, in which God is at the center, and God is the foundation. And this entails, for example, the dignity of the human being, and his createdness, and the creation in the image of God, and so on. And also that understanding of natural law which flows from that. So if you, for example, try in France, where they rebelled entirely, they overthrew this. They overthrew it completely. The French Republic, as it is today, is in rebellion against God. The United States is not. The United States is grounded in the truth of the very same covenant that the folks on the Mayflower entered into, is also the covenant which is the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is a covenant. And that covenant cannot be changed unless it is completely overthrown. It can be misunderstood, its depth can be lost. But just like a promise from one person to another, it's something that abides until it is formally revoked. And so this United States is, I would say, I agree with Eric Vogelin in saying that it is the last remaining representative on this earth of that civilization which began with the children of Israel. And that's why we have to support it as Muslims.
What would you ask?
What would I ask? Well, that's a really good question. I think it would be more personal. I think it would be, I hope it's not too personal, but I'd like to know what in your life as a child or as a young man or whatever drove you to your vocation.
I was a little nervous.
No, because you're so passionate, you know?
Well, it's not a problem to answer.
Yeah.
Very simple. And I've told this story to some. I was a physics and biology major at the University of Michigan. I was an athlete. I was a walk-on. I had my whole life planned, and then they started laughing at my faith in my biology classes. And laughing at my faith, they started telling me to study baboons to see what it was like to be a human being. And I just started raising my hand and said, I don't see how this gets in the way of doing good science. You have a philosophy of life that now you're telling me determines my investigatory powers in the scientific method. And the scientific method grew out of the Christian worldview, or a worldview that God created the world and God orders the world, you can study the world. And that you can put your hands in the dirt because God actually sanctified the dirt because he became a man at Christmas time. So, I mean, you wouldn't go point was, I started engaging that, and I started reading Francis Schaeffer, who said, whatever happened to the human race? And I said, we're the humanists. We're the ones who say humanity is big. We're not animals. We're not machines. I started fighting that, and then someone said, well, why don't you become a pastor? So I did. And honestly, in our tradition, you're called into the ministry, and so you all keep calling me and stuff, so I guess I'll keep going. But if I were to ever, I'm doing what I think God has told me to do, but it all goes back to that statement. Because see, as Christians, if I really believe that humanity is made by God, and that we're broken, and that's why we're rebelling and we're distant from God, then there's a sense where I have a duty even to my neighbor with whom I disagree. And I'm not going to let a secular guy tell me that none of that matters. And that's why. For good or for ill.
Wow, that's perfect timing. We're actually ready to move into Q&A, if everyone's cool with that. And I think we have a system for that. Not seeing anyone nodding their head. Great sign. We do have a system for that.
Do we have a microphone for them? No, we don't have a microphone. You got to go down.
You have to stand up and slam.
Yeah, you have to go among the people.
Yeah, you're like Will Dunning.
They don't know about this. Yeah, they don't know.
So many names.
Google it. Yeah. I'm 50, so.
No, he's a young man.
Okay, well, we are going to move into Q&A. You may need to talk fairly loud, which I hope you can do. And I'm going to give you 15 to 30 seconds to think of whatever questions you might have.
And also, let me say, please do not feel any kind of trepidation or like walking on eggshells. Ask me whatever. I really don't care. Just ask me
You
whatever.
have no idea what you just did.
No. I really like the hard questions, so please do it.
Do you walk it around, bro?
Yeah. Yeah, they're done with you.
Oh, you're losing your shit.
Yep, thank you. Oh, I think you raised your hand, you've got it. You kind of.
There's your
Yes, may I ask greater question real quick and then ask another? The definition of religion. Religion is defined as the belief and worship of a superhuman power or powers, especially gods or gods, a particular system of faith and worship. How does Christianity not fit that bill?
It depends on, religion usually, I try to bring things down to like how we talk about it. Religion for most people is things I follow to either get God on my side or get God's blessings. That's typically how people think of religion. And yeah, it's true. We do believe that there's God who's above us. We do believe all that. But salvation is the proclamation that it's kind of like in the Old Testament where you have the Jacob's ladder kind of thing. Religion is climbing the ladder because God is high and lifted up. The Bible actually says, no, that's not how salvation works. God had actually, Philippians 2, God had this mind in you which is in Christ Jesus, who actually left his godliness, emptied himself, and literally was born as a servant of the very world he created. So in our minds, that's the exact opposite of most religion understandings of people. So I'm just using that, it's provocative what I said, I grant you that. But it's a proclamation of freedom, because you had nothing to do with creating. God had everything to do with it. And religion is, you do have something. And that's the difference.
I do have a question for Ismail. This might be a little, I was reading the Quran, Surah 5:68, which says, say, O people of the scripture, you are standing on nothing unless you uphold the law of the Torah, the gospel, and what is revealed from the Lord. So this is what I'm not understanding, is that the Quran is saying that the people should obey the law and the gospel as they were intended.
Well, so in our belief, the revealed books that were revealed to the prophets, so like the Torah and the Gospel of Jesus and the Psalms of David, that they have, to a large extent, been, many of them have been lost. Much of it has been lost. Now, a core of it prevails and continues on. But there has been some loss but at the same, so in a sense, I would have to check how the scholars interpreted that, because I have to be careful not to put my own interpretation into things that I haven't studied, like I should. So I am being cautious there, but that's a generally true statement. Now, but in addition to that, in our view, those religions that came before, and granted your caveat about the term, are really all part of the same religion, so that Abraham, David, even Jesus, that they all believed in God's oneness, and they all taught more or less the same doctrine. And also a law that is more or less the same. Now, sometimes to some people the law was stricter, to others it was relaxed a little bit, but generally speaking, there's continuity there. So the Quran is admonishing the people of the book to stick to that, to stick to what has been revealed to them in terms of the law and how to treat one another. That's how I understand it.
I just need to say something. The Apostle Paul was accused of laxity too. Because remember, if you're saved by grace alone through faith, and the law is of no consequence, may I sin that grace may abound. That's actually in your Bible, right? So the point that he's struggling with, this is what Luther rediscovered, is that the law does its work. It's God's word, but it shows you your sin to the point where it crushes your ability to actually save yourself, which is why God finally has to do that. He has to fulfill the law for you, die on the cross for you, and give you his life as a gift. That's where we will differ. We agree with the fact that the law has a purpose in our life, the law has authority in our life. We just disagree with what the law will functionally do to you in your life.
In our view, the law reflects how God wants us to treat one another. So for example, not to steal, or not to commit adultery or whatever. Those are ways that we are to treat one another. And also the law also reflects certain rights, like religious rights, related to the temple, related to, the law is very important because, ultimately in the end, the highest benefit of the law is the human being humbling himself or herself to God's will. That in that itself is a wisdom, even if we don't understand for example, the law in Islam and Judaism not to eat pork. It's like, well, why can't we eat pork? You see a lot of Muslims saying things like, oh, it's because pork has trichinosis and it can cause disease and it's not healthy, it can give you cholesterol. But ultimately, in the end, it's God is limiting you from an enjoyable thing potentially for the sake of it's kind of like fasting, like you're withholding yourself from something, and when you do that for the sake of God, it's training the character. So there are things that we can see the wisdom in why you shouldn't commit adultery, for example. But there are other things that we may not fully understand why God prohibited or commanded a certain thing, and ultimately it's for submission to Him.
I'll leave it at that. I don't want to.
Well, I got to respond to that because Jesus actually. One thing I will say about Islam, as I was studying Islam back in the day, because I served near a mosque in New York, one of the reasons why I was told that they didn't, is that we translate the Bible. Because there is no such thing as to translate the Quran. The Quran is what it is, and if you translate it, that's not the Quran.
My main question is kind of diverting a little bit, is we have New Testament documents from 280 and the canon was established 400. Therefore, the doctrine of the gospel was very much as Bible, we have that. And the Quran was written 610. That's 200 years after. So the gospel canon already was established. Right? So they have an access to that, and yet they're saying follow this, except in Revelation 22:18, it says that there is no more revelation. So
I love these kind of questions, by the way.
So there's
Yeah, they're great
either
questions.
the Quran is saying, well,
Yeah.
obey the gospel, which says that you don't need the Quran, or the Quran is saying, obey all.
Right.
Well, that's what it's also about, but that's what we disagree. And I
It's a
would,
matter of faith.
yeah, and he and I would go back and forth on the power of the law to actually, because Jesus, that's where I was getting to. Jesus even says, if I reduce the law to love the God, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, 27 and then finally says, who will rescue me from this body of death? And then the gospel says, this is what God did for people who couldn't do it themselves. That's what we're going to struggle to disagree. But my point is that even Islam, when it talks about how these books came to us, we look at that as God willingly condescending to ways so we can understand it. But I can go back and reconstruct the Greek text, do text criticism, and you can see that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, where they found the Isaiah scrolls, and there was a tradition of you don't get one jot or tittle wrong as you translate.
So Isaiah is one of it's known to be one of the best preserved. The only thing I love this question. Actually, we can talk more offline about it. But what I was going to just respond is that we don't actually believe, this is one of the, I think, misconceptions about Islam. We don't actually believe that that salvation is through works. Because we believe that we are obligated to follow the law, but we also believe that we're Lutheran Center of life. So the human being was created weak. So there is no human being other than the prophets who did not sin. Every single one of them, like I'm commanded to pray 5 times a day, but I can promise you and guarantee you that that my prayer was very far from acceptable to God without His mercy in accepting it.
Let me answer that question again.
Yes.
Because I don't know this or not. I don't know this, so I want to know this. Did you say that except for the prophets, God created us?
Weak. The human being is weak.
Well,
The human being is created imperfect.
That's where we would say that sin is not inherent to humanity. Sin is something that invaded humanity. Kind of like when you get a cold, it takes over your whole body.
Right.
But it's not integral. So it's not, what was that song? I'm only human, born to make mistakes.
That's a good, exactly. That's what we would say.
We say that's theologically incorrect.
We would say that's correct.
God created you holy in the image of God, and Adam actually smashed that. Through Adam, all human beings now become inherently, not inherently, that's the wrong word, they become reflectively sinful to their core.
So for us, it's part of the human destiny to continually fall away and then to turn back, fall away, and turn back and fall away.
Wow.
Yes.
God, we're never going to get out of here.
That's all right. Shut the doors. No one can leave until midnight.
Close the door.
Yeah.
That was actually a liturgical thing, right?
Yeah, right.
So, my question is for Ishmael a little bit. You talked about how classical Muslim scholars said that churches were allowed to exist because God was being taught even amidst doctrinal errors. We kind of believe that through natural law, humans can come to a lot of conclusions about how the earth spins around the sun and stuff like that. But Augustine teaches us that it is through divine revelation that we come to understand God. How would you respond to a thought like that? How do you respond to revelation?
This is a very, very profound question. This is a very beautiful question. And it's a question that receives a lot of attention in Islamic scholarship and indeed in Christian and Jewish scholarship. So the relationship between reason or sort of natural human nature and revelation is, I would say that our scholars concluded that there is a great deal that the human being can know about what is good. So there is a natural inclination to know that it is good to, as I mentioned, to repay debts, or to not lie, or to not kill, or to, or to treat one's mother well, or to treat one's benefactor well. Those are all things that these are almost a sort of universal law to the extent that if someone disagrees with them, that is basically the definition of an unreasonable person. If someone doesn't agree with those things. Now, can you find people who don't agree with those things? Yes, but those are people who are not reasonable by definition. Okay. So, and also there's the story told about Abraham, that Abraham went out into the night and saw stars, and he said, these must be gods because they're high, they're bright, and then he saw the moon. The moon came and eclipsed the stars. He said, no, this must be the Lord. And then the sun came and eclipsed the moon. He said, and then he said, finally, he said, you know what? He said, God is the creator, the true Lord is the creator of all these things. There's a disagreement about, because we don't believe that Abraham actually ever worshipped gods other than the one God. There's some explanation of that, and our scholars said that that may have been a sort of method of argument of Abraham to the polytheists and idol worshippers in his era. But the point being that the human being can look and reflect on the creation and understand that this is the work of a creator, of the Lord of the universe. We can, in a very real way, Augustine said this. I love Augustine. He's one of my favorite philosophers, though I don't believe in him as a church father, but I believe in the truth that he did speak. And he said that we actually remember more than we are taught. So in other words, when someone comes and tells you something that you know, I mean, he said in this sense, the student sits in judgment over the teacher, because if the teacher tries to tell the student something that the student does not already know, then the student is going to reject that. What I mean by that is, for example, that we have a memory of being created by God. We have a memory of our relationship with Him, of our, and we forget that as we go through our lives and we're born and all this, sort of sounding theory is happening to us. And then when we're reminded that there is a God and that God is our benefactor and He is the Lord of the universe and all these things, then we recognize that as true. So I think that those things are possible without revelation. The role of revelation is to fill in those gaps that are not possible to understand through mere observation of the universe or intuition or those things that are knowable through reason and natural law. So that's the role of revelation. And having studied a great deal of what, for example, Aquinas, I realize you all are Lutheran, I'm not sure what your view of Aquinas is, but Aquinas had a very deep elaboration of this, and having read it, I can't recite it, by memory, but I can tell you that it resonates very much with what Islamic scholars said in terms of that relationship between revelation and also Blackstone, actually, of all people. It's a very interesting. Blackstone, the legal scholar, English legal scholar, who our founders were very much, who our founders looked to. He also has a very interesting discussion of the relationship between revelation and natural law and reason in his commentary. So you can actually Google that, Blackstone and revelation and reason, and you'll find his discussion of that. Islamic scholars basically said the same thing. Beautiful question, thank you.
Because this is a Christian university, and I'm willing to bet that most of the people here, our preconception of Islam has come from a Christian bias. I'm curious what, from your perspective, is the heart of Islam from a less biased perspective, not through the lens of Christianity, and from your perspective, how does that differ from Christianity?
So that's a very beautiful question as well. Well, I would say at its heart is the same in a very real sense. Not in every aspect, in every respect, but at its heart is submission of, or humbling of our will and ourselves to God, to the Lord of the universe, to the Lord of creation. It's an adoration and worship of Him, and longing for Him and yearning for Him, and a desire to return to Him, a desire to see His face, and a desire to be in His good pleasure. That's what Islam is at its essence. I believe that's what Christianity is at its essence in Judaism. Certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how, at least in one aspect, I would know it. And I was raised a Christian, so that's how I see it. I think that the difference arises in the attributes of God and understanding God's oneness to be that contradict that. So I would say that we have, it's really interesting, we have in many ways continuity with Judaism, to the extent that Jews can pray in our mosques. Like Maimonides, the Jewish scholar, rabbi said, that Jews can pray in mosques, but they can't pray in churches. But on the other hand, the Quran says that you will find of those closest to you, those who say, I am a Christian. This is a verse in the Quran. So you will find of those who you will find closest to you, those. And why? Who here can are the verses Muslims? You know the verse that says you will find those who are closest to you to be the Christians. Yeah, exactly. But then why? Well, yeah. I mean, basically because they're humble and they love God and so on. It just gives some descriptions of Christians, which in fact ring true today. It's really interesting. So,
one thing to say about the Trinity, because I know that's the key, because we claim and profess that we're monotheists.
Right.
The Trinity is super rational. It's 1 + 1 + 1 = 1 in that regard. And one of the arguments that we often use is no fisherman's ever going to come up with the concept of the Trinity, because people lead back into this notion that they created Jesus into the Godhead. The question finally becomes, that even the concept of individuality and community, they exist in the Godhead. And so when we say Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, there is one God, I would say Augustine, my biggest problem with Augustine is at the end of his life, he's trying to figure out the Trinity. That's what Augustine wrote at. Luther wrote on Genesis at the end of his life. So Luther gets back to the revelation of a God who loves him and actually comes for him to forgive his sins by grace alone through faith, whereas Augustine's trying to figure out how the Trinity can actually work philosophically. And Luther would have said, you can't do that. It's beyond your capacity. So to that degree, again, this is something obviously we would disagree on. We don't believe that Jesus was a created entity of the Father. And so even as they were trying to discuss how do we use these things, we would say the Father sends the Son in the power of the Spirit submits to the Son submits to the Father for your salvation, but these are all co-equal, and this is one God.
so I'm going to say something very subtle here, and I hope I can even articulate it, much less be understood. Once upon a time, I would have said, well, the fact that the Trinity doesn't make rational sense means it can't be true. I actually don't believe that anymore. I don't believe it anymore because, well, for one thing, I read Augustine. One of our points of disagreement is how to pronounce Augustine.
You say tomato.
Yes, exactly. I actually now fully accept that there are many things that the human mind cannot wrap. That just have itself around. You know what I mean? So the mere fact that you cannot understand something does not.
My point was to say that the fisherman wouldn't come up.
Well, right. Because if you look at the immense thought that people put, like Augustine and others, put into understanding it. Right. So, but I would say this. I would say that regardless of whether that is independently sensible or something in which the heart, in Augustine's words, in which the heart can find rest.
Right.
I would say that we believe that Jesus was in fact a human being. We believe he was born of a virgin. That's one of God's miracles. And we believe that he's the Messiah. And we talk about what does that mean. But nevertheless, that he is a creation. And so, so if he were not a creation and were actually, part of the Trinity in the way that Christians understand, then that is correct. It would be monotheism. You see. So I actually don't disagree with that. I would say that the reason that it is not monotheism is because Jesus was in fact part of creation. That's the place that we disagree. So I actually do not endorse or appreciate or think very helpful a lot of Muslim apologetics when it comes to the Trinity, because I think it sort of decides the point. I think the real point is just simply that we believe that Jesus was being a miraculous human being, and therefore does not participate in divinity, violation of God's law of oneness. That's what I was saying.
Yeah, one more question. Should be good. Any religious liberty questions? No, we're not done with it. We're just getting started. Yeah.
So you both mentioned fighting for religious unity in schools. How would you refute the argument of religious, the argument that religious teachers would be imposing their beliefs on non-religious families?
Yes, please.
The best way to deal with this is take the money out of it and decentralize the schools.
Absolutely.
Then you don't have that question.
Definitely.
Because if I'm a parent and I want my child to grow in the wisdom, first of all, implicit in that, because this is what the secularists always do it to us, implicit in that question is that there's this beautiful thing called facts and reality and
Yes.
morality and all this stuff that exists over here, but these religious crazies are the ones screwing it all up. And the reality is a lot of what you cherish today, universal education, equal rights, all those things flow from religious traditions. Even fighting against slavery, that flowed from a religious tradition. So here's what we would say. If you'll let me as a parent take my child wherever you want my money to go for education, then I don't care. I'll go to whatever school I want. You can teach whatever you want after school. The problem today is they're going to teach you a secular version of a machine version, that you're an animal, Darwin, there's no God, there's no truth, there's no nothing. I don't want my child to grow that way, but they're saying, I'm sorry, but you've got to send them to public school and we're going to take your money. So that's what the real issue is. And by the way, folks, African American 75%, Hispanic American 75%, even some Anglo kids, guys, all want parental choice for education. All of us, because we want our children to grow in wisdom, not just knowledge.
Amen. And you know, the very interesting thing about the question that you asked is, so I told this story this morning, I'll very briefly say it. My son, Hassan, it's about 2018, 2019, he came to me with all kinds of sort of questions related to the existence of God, and whether God exists, and whether you can believe in God to be a good person. And they were really interesting questions that young people ask. But I came to find that he was being actually like indoctrinated by one of his teachers. He was a theater teacher that had nothing, obviously, this had nothing to do with theater, you know. So we had a meeting with the assistant principal and his counselor and the teacher, and trying to get to the bottom of why she thought it was appropriate to discuss these kind of things with my son. And I said, look, if you had been a Christian and you were teaching my son that, you know, Islam is wrong and you should believe in Jesus, this would be like, oh, it's an establishment clause violation. But you were teaching him, you think you're being neutral. You know what I mean? It's like, no, that would be something like imposing. But what I'm doing is not imposing. I'm just discussing the facts of the reality and so on. You know, so there is no such thing as neutrality. It's a fiction. In fact, the fiction of neutrality is even more dangerous than open indoctrination, because open indoctrination, at least you're like, you know, the person is being honest with what they're doing. That's why I would send my children to a Lutheran or Christian school, or Catholic school, before I would send them to a public school, because they're actually, okay, you're going to now. Here you go, son, you're off to school. Now you're going to hear people talking about, you know, Jesus is the Son of God and so on, and just, you know, we don't believe that, right? So just go in there and learn your lessons and you know, and everything, but just don't follow them in that thing. But you can't, when it's insinuated into you through the Trojan horse of neutrality and reality, you know, that's a very, very dangerous thing. So, and what's even worse is his own faith. See, that's the thing. She's trying to undermine Christianity and Islam and every other belief. You know what I mean? At least if my son goes, he's going to hear that God, to Catholics. I honestly, I'm not saying this rhetorically. I actually really would send my children to a Catholic school or a Lutheran school before I would send them to a public school.
Well, I just want to get close by first saying I think this was an exceptional example of two people with different stories, different backgrounds, different beliefs, unwavering beliefs,
I don't think, we would say we do not see enough of this, and the narrative we're sold is that this doesn't happen. And it can't happen, because our society is so toxically polarized, but this is actually something we can do. And personally, I feel the stronger our beliefs, the more likely we can have this discussion. You know, I think some would say if you're too dogmatic, you can't have this discussion. But it's exactly the opposite, right? I mean, these are two people with obviously strong convictions who showed us that they can talk together with respect and dignify one another. And with that being said, can we give them a round of applause?
Ismail Royer and our own Dr. Seltz, Reverend Dr. Seltz, for being here and giving so much of themselves today. So now we have a drawing here, and it has the name getting drawn. I'm going to draw it right now. Okay.
The fix is in. Thank you so much. You very much.
And has no idea that I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I must tell you that she worked very, very, very hard to bring together all kinds of details for this event to happen over months of time. And so, Dr. Royer, I want to also finally recognize that we were blessed